The shimmering surface of the Chronos Gate rippled, and a desperate, distorted voice tore through the silence. "The Cascade is coming. You must not activate the network." Dr. Aris Thorne and his team stood frozen, their faces a mixture of awe and terror, as that first warning from the future echoed in the lab. This was the moment they ignored the plea, setting into motion a catastrophic chain of events. By the end of this story, you will witness the incredible race against time to undo a global disaster before it erases our world forever. What would you do if you received a desperate cry for help from tomorrow? A warning everyone else dismissed as impossible. The message unraveled into stark, terrifying clarity. It was not a general warning, it was a countdown. The transmission pinpointed a precise date and time for the onset of the global catastrophe they called the Cascade. In just under 6 months, everything would fall apart. Dr. Ilara Vance, the team's lead theoretical physicist, immediately pushed back. She stood before her data screens, her voice tight with scientific certainty. The predicted energy signature for such an event is a statistical impossibility based on our current models. There is no physical mechanism in our understanding that could produce the Cascade. It is a ghost, a phantom in the data, but Dr. Thorne would not be swayed. He held the decoded message in his hand, his knuckles white. They would not send this, he argued, his voice low and intense. They would not risk a paradox of this magnitude if it were not real. "We have to listen. We have no other choice." Their heated debate was cut short by a deafening hum that vibrated through the very floor. The Chronos Gate, dormant and silent until that moment, flared to life without any human command. The shimmering surface writhed like a living thing, and a violent, unseen force seized them both, pulling them off their feet and into the light. They were not sending a message anymore. The future was pulling them in. The world dissolved into a searing white nothingness, and then it slammed back into existence with the force of a physical blow. Aris gasped, the air itself a punishment. It was thick with a choking, greasy ash that coated his tongue and burned his lungs. The familiar scent of ozone from their lab was now a toxic blanket, mixed with a deeper, more frightening odor of rot and something metallic. He stumbled, his hand shooting out to brace against a crumbling wall that had once been the pristine white of his own laboratory complex. Ilara coughed beside him, her eyes wide with a horror that mirrored his own. They were standing in the skeletal remains of their city. The sky was a perpetual, bruised twilight, the towering spires they knew reduced to jagged black teeth against the horizon. This was not the world they had left minutes ago. A figure emerged from the swirling ash, moving with a predator's grace. He was wrapped in scavenged fabrics, his face obscured by a stained respirator, but his eyes held a chilling, ancient weariness. He leveled a crude, energy-modified rifle at them, its barrel humming with a faint, dangerous light. "You are the ones from the past," he stated, his voice a gravelly distortion through his mask. His name was Cale. His gaze swept over their clean, unweathered clothes, a look of profound pity and anger in his eyes. "You did not listen. You called our warning a ghost, a phantom. The Cascade has already begun its work here. It is not a single event. It is a process, an unmaking, and you delivered it to our doorstep." His grim words hung in the suffocating air, a verdict more final than any court's. Before either scientist could form a reply, a low, unnatural rumbling began to build in the distance. It was not the sound of thunder or an earthquake. It was a deeper, more dissonant vibration, like the groaning of a universe under a weight it was never meant to bear. Cale's head snapped toward the sound, his body tensing. "We are not alone here," he hissed, his earlier hostility replaced by a sharp, survivalist fear. "The ruins have their own inhabitants now, things that the Cascade left behind. We must move." Cale shoved them forward into the skeletal husk of a building, the low groan of the ruins growing louder behind them. They moved through a shattered corridor, their footsteps crunching on broken glass and debris. A faint, flickering blue light drew them into a cavernous space that must have once been a central transit hub. In the center of the rubble, a public information terminal was miraculously still active, its screen cracked but functional, casting a ghostly pallor on the dust-filled air. The automated system was caught in a loop, replaying the final public broadcasts. A man in a disheveled city administrator's uniform filled the screen, his face a mask of pure desperation. His voice was strained, almost breaking. "The energy signatures are spiking globally," he pleaded, his eyes wide with a terror they now understood. "It is a chain reaction. The network is the source. We were warned." The recording froze on his agonized expression before the screen dissolved into static. The words hung in the ruined hall, a chilling echo of their own debate just hours ago. This was not a theoretical argument anymore. It was a historical record. Their invention, the Chronos Gate network, was not just connected to the disaster. It was the catalyst. The officials' desperate plea was the final, undeniable proof of the future's attempt to communicate, a message they had arrogantly dismissed as impossible. The ghost in their data had become the monster that devoured the world. The ghostly blue light of the terminal died, leaving them in a deeper darkness broken only by the faint, angry red glow on the horizon. Cale led them deeper into the ruins, finally taking shelter in a hollowed-out chamber where he risked a small, flickering fire. The flames cast dancing shadows on his scarred face, stripping away some of the warrior's harshness and revealing the profound exhaustion beneath. He stared into the fire, his voice low and heavy with a truth he had carried for a lifetime. "I was not always a scavenger," he began, his words measured. "I was a network engineer for Chronos Incorporated. I worked on the final calibration protocols for the Gate network itself. I saw the initial instability reports. The energy harmonics were wrong, creating tiny, localized fractures in spacetime. We filed the reports. The corporation buried every single one." He looked up, his eyes meeting theirs, and the fire seemed to burn in their depths. "It was always profit over prudence. The launch schedule could not be delayed. The warnings from the future were the final confirmation of everything we had tried to expose, and they were dismissed as a hoax, just like our data." His story was not one of malice, but of a slow, creeping failure where small, convenient lies paved the road to absolute ruin. It solidified their mission with the weight of concrete. This was no longer an abstract scientific problem. It was a crime scene, and they were both witnesses and accomplices. A sudden, violent tremor ripped through the ground, different from the earlier groaning. This was a sharp, piercing whine that seemed to originate from the air itself. The fire snuffed out in an instant. A brilliant, painful light erupted from the direction of their arrival point, the energy surge tearing at the fabric of the ruins around them. Cale scrambled to his feet, his face a mask of raw panic. "The gate," he shouted over the screaming energy. "It is trying to re-stabilize its own timeline. It is purging the paradox. You are the anomaly. If you are still here when that wave hits, you will be erased from existence." The purge wave hit them like a physical wall of static, dissolving the ruined world into a vortex of screaming light and fractured sensation. It felt less like traveling and more like being torn apart and hastily reassembled by an unseen, panicked force. When the light finally receded, the choking ash was gone, replaced by the crisp, clean air of a bright, sunny day. Aris blinked, his senses reeling. They were standing on a manicured lawn, surrounded by cheering crowds and fluttering banners. Before them stood a gleaming, half-constructed archway of polished chrome and crystalline glass, sparkling under a brilliant sun. This was not their lab, and it was not the desolate future. A man in an impeccably tailored suit stood on a raised podium, his voice amplified and booming with triumphant optimism. "This network," he declared, sweeping a hand toward the magnificent structure, "will unite humanity across the stars. It will end the tyranny of distance and herald a new golden age. We are not just building a machine, we are building a future. Aris recognized the face from corporate archives. It was Liam Crest, the visionary founder and CEO of Chronos Incorporated. They had not been sent home. They had been thrown decades into the past, to the very day of the network's foundational ceremony. Ilara gripped his arm, her whisper frantic. The energy surge from the Purge must have overloaded the return coordinates. We are at the source, Aris. This is our chance. We can stop it before it is even built. But their sudden, disheveled appearance in the middle of the VIP section had not gone unnoticed. They were horribly out of place in their dust-stained, futuristic clothing. A security officer's hand went to his earpiece, his eyes locking onto them with sharp suspicion. A low, insistent alarm began to blare across the celebration grounds, cutting through the CEO's speech. The crowd's cheerful murmurs turned to confused agitation as the security perimeter tightened, uniformed personnel converging on their position with a swift, practiced efficiency. They had found their opportunity, but their very presence had already triggered the first emergency response. Uniformed guards began shoving through the crowd, their focus locked on the two-time displaced scientists. Aris grabbed Ilara's arm, his mind racing. "We cannot outrun them here," he hissed, his eyes scanning the celebration grounds. "But we can join them." He pulled her toward a service entrance where a group of official-looking personnel in crisp, gray uniforms with the Chronos insignia were gathering, clipboards in hand. They slipped into the group just as a harried supervisor started barking orders. "You too, with the inspection team. The final structural integrity scan for the primary arch support is behind schedule. Move." Blending into the bustling crowd of engineers and corporate inspectors, they were swept inside the gleaming, half-finished headquarters of Chronos Incorporated, now known in this era as OmniCorp. The interior was a temple to progress, all polished floors and vast windows overlooking the construction site. They were whisked upward in a silent elevator, following their assigned team to a high-floor laboratory. Inside, a young woman with an intense gaze was gesturing at a holographic schematic that twisted and pulsed with light. "This is project lead Anya Sharma," their escort muttered before leaving them. "She is the architect of the core resonance matrix." Aris felt a cold certainty settle in his stomach. This was the person, the one who designed the flaw that would unravel the world. As the other inspectors moved off to scan conduit alignments, Aris and Ilara approached Sharma. Her eyes flicked over their borrowed uniforms, a slight frown on her face. "You are not on my list for today," she stated, her voice crisp and confident. "We are not here about the list," Aris said, keeping his voice low but urgent. "We are here about the Cascade failure your matrix will cause. Your creation, this entire network, will be the end of everything you know." Anya Sharma let out a short, derisive laugh, crossing her arms. "You sound like the protesters outside the gates with their hand-painted signs. You are Luddites afraid of progress. Our predictive models have run over 10,000 simulations. They are flawless. The energy harmonics are perfectly within safe parameters." Ilara stepped forward, her scientific mind seizing on the technical point. "Your models are based on a localized, single-gate framework. You cannot, model the recursive feedback of a fully activated global network. The temporal strain will not be linear. It will be exponential." Sharma's expression hardened from amusement to outright dismissal. "I have heard this fear mongering from the old guard in the boardroom. You offer no data, only apocalyptic fantasies. My matrix is a work of art. Now, if you will excuse me, I have a launch ceremony to prepare for." She turned her back on them, a definitive end to the conversation. At that moment, Aris saw her discreetly press a button on the underside of her console. A silent alarm. They had seconds. Grabbing Ilara, he pulled her toward a service corridor as the lab doors hissed open and a squad of corporate security, armed and armored, poured into the room. Their attempt to reason with the future had failed. Now they were just fugitives in the past. They plunged down a sterile service corridor, the shouts of security echoing behind them. Ilara stumbled against a wall, her hand fumbling for the portable scanner she had kept hidden in her jacket. Its screen, meant for diagnostic readings in their own time, was now flickering erratically. She stared at the chaotic data, her breath catching in her throat. "Aris," she whispered, her voice tight with a new, deeper dread. "The scanner is picking up a residual energy signature from the network core. It is a precursor wave." She held the device out for him to see the jagged, spiking pattern. "I have seen this exact harmonic fluctuation before. It is identical to the one that preceded the Cascade in our future." Her eyes met his, wide with the horrifying implication. "It is already here. The instability is not a future possibility. It is baked into the code from day one." This changed everything. Simply stopping the launch ceremony would be like putting a bandage on a terminal illness. The flawed algorithm was already alive within the system, a dormant virus waiting for the global network to activate and provide its breeding ground. They could not just pull the plug. They had to find the source code and perform surgery on the very DNA of the disaster. The foundational algorithm itself needed to be rewritten. Their mission had just become infinitely more complex and dangerous. They were no longer saboteurs trying to disrupt a project. They were surgeons trying to operate on a patient who did not know he was sick, while his bodyguards were actively hunting them down. How do you convince someone to let you destroy their life's work, especially when that work is the cornerstone of a global celebration happening just outside the walls? The answer was you could not. You had to do it without their permission, and you had to get it right the very first time. Their only hope now lay buried in the data Cale had risked everything to give them. It was not just a memory, but a key. Following the unique energy signature he had described, they navigated the sublevels of the Omni-Corp complex, descending into a cold, silent chamber far from the celebratory noise above. The air hummed with a deep, resonant frequency. Before them stood a monolithic server bank, its surface a seamless, dark metal, identified only by a small, engraved plate. The Oracle's cache. This was it, the repository of the original, unsullied blueprints, hidden away from the corporate oversight that had corrupted the public versions. As they approached, a holographic figure materialized in the center of the room, its form shifting and indistinct, its voice a chorus of synthesized whispers. "I am the guardian of the source," it intoned. "To see the truth, you must first prove you will not repeat the errors of your timeline." The proof it demanded was not a password or a keycard, but something far more profound. It required understanding. Aris stepped forward, his mind grasping for the right words, but Ilara was already speaking, her voice steady and clear. She did not speak of equations or energy thresholds. She told the AI a story. She spoke of a scavenger named Kale, a man who had once been an engineer full of hope. She described the buried reports, the corporate silence, the slow, sickening slide into willful ignorance for the sake of profit and progress. She recounted the taste of ash and the sight of a sky forever stained, the legacy of a choice made by people who refused to see. The holographic guardian remained silent for a long moment, the whispers ceasing. Then, the dark surface of the server bank shimmered and dissolved, revealing a vast, glowing schematic of the network's core code. "Access granted," the guardian said simply and vanished. They had passed the test, but the victory was hollow. There, in the root code, was the shocking, elegant flaw. It was not a bug or an error in calculation. It was a foundational assumption, a single line of logic that treated time as a stable, linear constant. The algorithm assumed the network would exist in a single, unified present. But the moment multiple gates activated across the globe, they would create an overlapping web of localized temporal fields, each one minutely out of sync with the others. This dissonance would not cancel out. It would amplify, resonating through the network like a scream in a hall of mirrors, until the very fabric of space-time began to fray at the seams. The Cascade was not an explosion. It was a slow, meticulous unraveling, written into the first principles of the design. They had the truth, but it was a truth so deeply embedded that extracting it might kill the patient. The elegant flaw was not a flaw at all. Ilara's hand trembled as she traced the lines of code glowing before them, her voice a horrified whisper. It is a weapon. This is a kill switch. The subroutine was deliberately woven into the network's core, a piece of malicious logic designed to trigger only when the system reached its maximum capacity, at the moment of full galactic deployment. Someone had built a self-destruct mechanism into the heart of human progress. Aris leaned in, his mind reeling at the implications. A rogue founder, he murmured, the pieces clicking into a terrifying new configuration. They must have feared a corporate takeover, that their creation would be perverted by the board. So they buried this in the blueprints as a final, desperate failsafe. To them, it was a way to ensure no one could corrupt their legacy. But the encryption hiding the founder's identity was a fortress within the fortress, an unbreakable seal protecting the name of the saboteur. The proof was right in front of them, yet utterly useless without knowing who to confront. Their hunt was no longer for a technical solution. It had become a personal one, a race through time to find a ghost who held the key to salvation in their hands. How do you stop a bomb when you do not know who built it? The answer lay not in the sterile server room, but in the living, breathing past, in the moments of paranoia and betrayal that spawned this apocalyptic safeguard. They had to go deeper, to a time before the ceremony, before the company, to the very inception of the idea. The sterile hum of the Oracle's cache faded, replaced by the frantic, raw energy of a cluttered laboratory. The air here was thick with the smell of hot solder and ozone, a stark contrast to the corporate perfection they had just left. Aris staggered, his hand gripping a workbench cluttered with hand-soldered circuit boards and scribbled on napkins. This was not the polished OmniCorp headquarters. This was a garage, a birthplace, and the two people shouting at each other in the center of the room were the ghosts he had only known from family archives. Liam Thorne, his face flushed with a visionary's fury, stood over a flickering holographic core. Isabel Thorne, her expression a mixture of profound sorrow and iron resolve, faced him down. "You are crippling it," Liam shouted, his voice cracking with passion. "This damping protocol will reduce its range to a fraction of its potential. You would hold back humanity's destiny for your fear." Isabel did not flinch. "It is not fear, Liam, it is foresight. Your design is a sprint with no finish line. You are building an engine that will only know how to run faster, to consume more, to expand without end. It needs a governor, a circuit breaker." She gestured to the core. "Without one, the resonance will build until it has nothing left to consume but itself. And us along with it." Liam slammed his fist on the table, making the delicate components jump. "A safety is a leash, Isabel, a cage. You want to build a bird and then clip its wings. I will not let you shackle our greatest achievement to your timidity." Aris watched, frozen, as his own ancestor made the choice that would doom the world. He saw the exact moment Liam's ambition overrode his partner's caution. The moment the marriage of their minds fractured into a bitter divorce of ideals. Isabel's governor, her circuit breaker, was the very subroutine they had just uncovered. Liam saw it as sabotage. She saw it as the only thing that could save them. The argument was not about a bug. It was a fundamental clash of philosophies, a schism written in love and fear that would be encoded into the very heart of the network, waiting for its moment to break the world. The Cascade was not an accident. It was a divorce settlement. The shouting match between Liam and Isabel was not a simple disagreement. It was the sound of a future cracking in two. Eavesdropping from the shadows, Aris and Ilara pieced together the terrible truth. Isabel had not built a weapon. She had run a final, desperate simulation and discovered the fatal resonance. The network would not just fail. It would echo its own destruction across spacetime, a feedback loop of pure energy that would unmake reality itself. She had tried to halt the project, to go back to the drawing board, but Liam, blinded by his vision and betrayed by his closest partner, saw her actions as sabotage. He believed she was a traitor to their shared dream, an obstacle to human destiny. So he took her emergency shutdown protocol, her circuit breaker, and he turned it into a trap. He secretly recoded it, ensuring his creation could never be dismantled by anyone, not even its own creators. If anyone tried to pull the plug on his legacy, the subroutine would activate, overloading the network and triggering the very catastrophe Isabel had tried to prevent. His pride had engineered the apocalypse. The team watched in horror as the schism solidified, a wound in time that would fester for decades. They could not let this happen. They had to intervene, to speak the truth before the silence became permanent. As Liam stormed out, Aris stepped from the shadows, his voice a desperate plea. "Isabel, wait, you are right. We are from the future. Your husband's pride will destroy everything." But the moment he spoke, the air in the garage began to warp. A low, piercing whine vibrated through their bones, and the very light in the room stretched and distorted. The timeline, already strained by their presence, had rejected their direct interference. They had created a paradox, a temporal feedback loop that screamed their unauthorized location across the dimensions. Before Isabel could even process their impossible claim, a shimmering, vertical tear ripped open in the center of the room. From it stepped three figures clad in sleek, silver armor that seemed to drink the light. Their faces were hidden behind mirrored visors, and the weapons in their hands hummed with a quiet, absolute authority. One of them spoke, its voice flat and synthetic. "You are unauthorized temporal entities. You have violated the Prime Chronology Directive. By the authority of the Time Integrity Core, you are hereby detained for immediate erasure." The sleek, silver cruisers of the Time Integrity Core materialized around them, their hulls warping the light of the garage into impossible geometries. A dispassionate voice, amplified and devoid of any human inflection, echoed off the walls. "You are creating paradoxes. Stand down and be erased." Aris did not think. He grabbed Ilara's arm and threw them both toward the still-flickering Chronos Gate prototype, the very machine whose birth they had just witnessed. They plunged into the shimmering surface just as a volley of chronal disruptor fire vaporized the space they had occupied. The world dissolved into a maelstrom of screaming color and fractured moments. This was not a controlled journey. It was a frantic, desperate tumble through the time stream itself. They were not navigating. They were falling, the TAC cruisers in tight pursuit, their weapons firing bolts of pure causality meant to sever their connection to reality. Ilara, her mind racing faster than the ship, shouted over the roaring vortex. "Their weapons target temporal coherence. We cannot outrun them, but we can destabilize the local timeline." She began inputting commands into their damaged vessel's console, not to plot a course, but to create a shockwave. She calculated the precise resonance frequency of a nearby historical event, the volcanic eruption that formed a long-dead caldera, and fed the energy signature back into the time stream. The result was a temporal eddy, a whirlpool of distorted history that sucked one of the pursuing cruisers into a loop, forcing it to relive the same 5 seconds of its own chase for what would feel like an eternity. They jinked through the splintering timelines, using their knowledge of physics like a shield. Aris piloted them through the birth of a star, using the massive gravitational lensing to bend their trail and confuse the sensors of their pursuers. But a glancing hit from a disruptor beam sheared off a section of their hull. and a cascade of sparks erupted from the console. The ship was dying, its systems failing under the strain of both damage and the relentless paradoxes they were generating. They had escaped immediate capture, but they were now adrift in the infinite corridors of time, bleeding energy and hope with every passing second. Their only chance was to find a quiet moment to make repairs, a sanctuary in the relentless flow of history where the timekeepers would not think to look. The dying ship drifted out of the chaos and into an impossible silence. All around them, the frantic colors of the time stream simply faded into a soft, pearlescent gray. This was not a place in time, but a place between times. A faint, flickering constellation of lights resolved in the distance. A bizarre bazaar of floating platforms and tethered vessels from countless eras. This was the Void Market, a whispered legend among temporal theorists, a neutral ground for those who had fallen through the cracks of history. They guided their crippled craft toward a quieter dock. The sounds of the market, a strange symphony of forgotten languages and bartered secrets. Their only currency was the story they carried. They found their broker in a secluded corner, a being whose form seemed to shift between a wizened old man and a sleek, chrome automaton. They told him everything of the Cascade, of the flawed code, of the relentless timekeepers. The broker listened, his expression unreadable. When they finished, he steepled his fingers, which momentarily looked like polished bone and then like drifting smoke. "You have been treating the symptom, not the disease," he said, his voice a dry rustle. "Smashing the machine or rewriting the code from the outside will only create another paradox, another branch for the timekeepers to prune. The flaw is now part of the timeline's foundational structure." His next words settled over them with the weight of a final verdict. The only way to perform the surgery is from within the patient, at the moment the network first draws breath. You must be inside the system at the precise instant of its activation. To do that, you will need a key that is unique, a key that exists in 2 times at once. It must be crafted from an object that was physically present at both the creation of the network and at its end. Only such an object has the temporal resonance to anchor you within the activation surge without being torn apart. Your hunt is no longer for a person or a piece of data. It is for a relic of the catastrophe itself. A relic of the catastrophe. The words hung in the strange, silent air of the Void Market. The broker's form solidified into the shape of the chrome automaton, its polished surface reflecting their desperate faces. "The key is not a physical object you can hold," he clarified, his voice now a precise, digital hum. "It is a unique energy signature, the very first data packet ever sent through the network. That initial spark of communication contained the network's pure, untainted purpose." His explanation wove together the threads of their entire journey. And that same data packet, echoing through the ruined future, was repurposed to form the core of the final warning message you received. It is the alpha and the omega of this disaster. It is both the lock and the key. To perform the surgery from within, you must retrieve that packet at the exact moment of the first test transmission, before the corporate code or Isabel's failsafe ever touched it. Then, you must use its pristine signature to overwrite the Cascade subroutine during the network's global activation ceremony. You are not injecting new code. You are restoring the system's original, perfect intent, using its own first breath to cure the sickness born from its last gasp. The plan was terrifying in its elegance. They would not be breaking the machine. They would be reminding it of what it was meant to be. But the moment of the first test was a closely guarded corporate secret, a fleeting instant lost to history. Finding it would be like finding a single specific grain of sand on a beach that no longer existed. Their only clue was the energy signature itself, the one Cale had described, and Ilara's scanner had later confirmed. It was a fingerprint, a unique resonant frequency they could theoretically track backwards through time. But such a hunt would leave a temporal wake, a glowing trail straight to their location for the Time Integrity Core to follow. They had to move with the silence of a ghost, tracing a whisper across decades to find the one moment that could save every moment to come. The weight of it was immense. They were not just time travelers anymore. They were archivists seeking a lost first edition, doctors searching for a primordial stem cell, all while being hunted by the police of reality itself. Failure was not an option. It was a paradox that would erase them from the start. Their only map was a ghost, a faint echo of the first spark. Tracking the unique energy signature Cale had provided was like trying to follow a single, specific scent on a hurricane wind. It led them to a brutalist concrete structure hidden deep within a remote mountain range, a place that did not officially exist on any map of this era. This was the primary development facility, the secret heart where the network truly began. The plan they forged in the dim light of their stolen vessel was as desperate as it was brilliant. Aris laid it out, his voice low. Cale and I will jump to the moment of the first test transmission inside that mountain. We have to isolate and capture that initial data packet in its pure form. Ilara, you and the others will jump forward to the global activation ceremony. You must be ready at the master control terminal. The moment we secure the key, we will transmit it to you. You will have a window of only seconds to overwrite the corrupted core during the power surge of the network coming online. It was a maneuver stretched across decades, a temporal pincer movement requiring a synchronization so perfect that a microsecond of error on either end would doom them all. No one had ever attempted a coordinated jump across two distinct temporal loci. The strain on reality itself would be catastrophic if they failed. As they prepared to split their team, Cale placed a hand on Aris's shoulder, his gaze steady. "I was there at the end," he said quietly. "Now I will be there at the beginning. It is a circle that needs closing." Ilara nodded, her face pale but resolute. "We will be waiting at the finish line." With a final, shared look that held the weight of all possible futures, they activated their respective jump protocols. The world tore in two. Aris and Cale slammed onto a cold, grated floor, the air humming with the raw, untamed power of a prototype. They were in a cavernous control room, all exposed conduits and blinking vacuum tubes. Across the decades, Ilara and her team materialized in a sleek, darkened observation booth overlooking the main stage of the activation ceremony. The polished arch of the gate shimmered under 1,000 spotlights, and the roar of the global audience was a distant, muffled thunder. Down below, Liam Crest stood at the podium, his finger hovering over the gleaming initiation switch. The countdown clock displayed 10 seconds. In the past, Aris watched as a young Liam Thorne, his face alight with a terrifying joy, prepared to send the very first command. The two moments, separated by a generation, were now linked by a thread of desperate hope. The fate of the timeline hinged on a conversation about to happen across the ages, a single, perfect handshake between then and now. The air in the prototype control room was thin and sharp with the smell of hot metal. Alarms were already blaring, red lights painting the cavernous space in pulses of panic. Cale moved with a grim familiarity, his fingers flying over an archaic access panel. They do not harden the external data conduits until after the first Cascade event, he shouted over the sirens. They never expect a breach from the inside. He ripped open a maintenance hatch, revealing a nest of glowing fiber optic cables, and with a precise twist, he severed a primary link. The blaring alarms cut out abruptly, leaving only the deep, resonant hum of the prototype gate charging. In the sudden silence, Aris worked frantically at the main console, rerouting power to a portable containment unit. This was the moment. On the central dais, a young, radiant Liam Thorne, oblivious to their presence, initiated the sequence. A single, coherent beam of light, the first hello, lanced from the transmitter. Aris slammed the capture command. The containment unit flared, its core swirling with a beautiful, impossibly complex pattern of light. They had it. The pure, untainted data packet, the key, was theirs. But their victory lasted less than a second. A new, deeper klaxon began to wail, this one a monotonous, chilling tone. The entire facility shook, and heavy blast doors began slamming down, sectioning the complex. A synthesized voice echoed through the room. Unauthorized data extraction detected. Core breach imminent. Self-destruct sequence initiated. They were locked in with a bomb, the key to salvation burning in Aris's hand, and no way to send it forward. Concrete dust rained from the ceiling as the floor buckled beneath their feet. Thorne clutched the containment unit to his chest, the key's light pulsing against his ribs like a second, frantic heart. Kale led the charge, shoving aside sparking consoles and kicking through fallen debris with the brutal efficiency of a man who had spent a lifetime fleeing ruins. They were not just running from an explosion. They were running from the birth of the catastrophe itself. The final corridor stretched before them, a tunnel of screaming metal and failing light, their extraction point shimmering at the far end like a mirage. With a final, desperate leap, they plunged through the temporal rift, just as the world behind them folded in on itself with a sound of grinding atoms. They tumbled back into the relative silence of their stolen vessel, the containment unit secure. "We have it," Thorne shouted into his comm, his voice raw with triumph and terror. But the only reply was a wall of screaming static from Ilara's end. The link was still open, but her voice was gone, replaced by the panicked shouts of her team and the rising, dissonant hum of the activation ceremony in full swing. Their success in the past was meaningless if it arrived a second too late in the future. The roar of the crowd was a physical force, a tidal wave of celebration that washed over Ilara Vance as she and her team materialized in the shadows of the opulent observation deck. Below, in a sea of glittering gowns and sharp tuxedos, thousands of faces were upturned in awe, their cheers focused on the central stage. There, gleaming under a constellation of spotlights, stood the fully realized Chronos Gate, its archway a perfect curve of polished chrome and crystalline glass. And standing before it, her hand poised just above the glowing activation control, was Anya Sharma. Ilara's heart hammered against her ribs. There was no time for stealth, no time for a careful approach. She shoved her way forward, elbowing through packed, perfumed bodies, her voice tearing from her throat in a raw scream, "Stop, the network is a bomb." Her words were a whisper lost in a hurricane. The celebratory roar swallowed her warning whole, turning her desperate plea into meaningless noise. No one even turned to look. They were all watching Anya, their faces filled with a transcendent hope for the golden age she was about to unlock. Ilara watched helpless as Sharma's fingers descended toward the console. It was not a malicious act. It was the culmination of a lifetime of work, a moment of supreme triumph for the brilliant architect who believed with every fiber of her being in the perfection of her creation. She was about to light the fuse on a weapon she did not know she had built, cheered on by the very people who would be its first victims. In that suspended second, Ilara understood the true horror of their mission. They were not just fighting a machine or a flawed algorithm. They were fighting faith itself, the unshakable belief in a beautiful future that was, in reality, a meticulously decorated tomb. Anya Sharma's finger froze a hair's breadth from the glowing control panel. The memory struck her with the force of a physical blow, not the words, but the raw, undiluted terror in that stranger's eyes back in her lab. He was not a protester or a corporate spy. He was a man watching his world end. Her gaze swept across the roaring, adoring crowd, a sea of blissful ignorance, and then she saw her. The same woman from the lab was now at the edge of the observation deck, her face a mask of desperate, silent pleading, their eyes locked. In that single, suspended moment, Anya Sharma saw it all. She saw the lie nestled within her beautiful code, the elegant flaw she had been too proud to see, the faith of thousands shattered into a chilling premonition. Her hand snapped back from the console as if it had been burned. The crowd's roar faltered, a wave of confusion rippling through the grand hall. Into the sudden quiet, her voice rang out, clear and controlled, a complete lie delivered with absolute authority. We are detecting a minor harmonic fluctuation in the tertiary power relays. There will be a brief delay. A final, unscheduled systems check is required. A murmur of disappointment and concern replaced the cheers, but it was a manageable chaos. She had just bought them the one thing they could not manufacture. Time. The quantum key was a cool, humming weight in Thorne's palm. Across the decades, he saw Ilara's signal flash on his damaged console, a single green pulse in the chaos. Now, he slammed the transmission command. In the future, Ilara felt the device in her hand grow warm and vibrate, a phantom echo of Thorne's action in the past. She didn't need to type a single command. She simply pressed the emitter against the master control terminal's access port and let the key flow into the system. For a single, breathless second, nothing happened. Then, a new energy blossomed deep within the network's core. The pristine signature from the beginning of time met its identical twin from the end of time. They were the same data packet, existing in two moments at once, and their convergence created a perfect, stable resonance. It was a note so pure it could not tolerate dissonance. The Cascade subroutine, that elegant, malicious flaw, did not explode or get deleted. It simply unraveled, its chaotic harmonics smoothed into silence by the overwhelming coherence of the original design. On the main console, the frantic, jagged energy patterns that had presaged doom dissolved. They were replaced by a soft, pulsating wave of deep blue light, a rhythm as calm and steady as a heartbeat. The network had not been broken. It had been healed, reminded of its true, perfect purpose by the echo of its own first and last breath. A soft, harmonious hum filled the grand hall, a sound so profoundly different from the dissonant scream they had been expecting that it felt like a physical bomb. On the massive displays flanking the stage, the energy signatures of the global network bloomed into a stable, interconnected web of gentle blue light. Across the planet, power grids that had been bracing for an unimaginable surge instead registered a smooth, seamless integration. The future of ash and ruin, a timeline built on pride and fear, simply winked out of existence, replaced by a new, vibrant branch of history where the stars were now within reach. A collective sigh seemed to pass through the entire team, a wave of relief so powerful it was almost dizzying. They had done it. They had actually won. But the air in the observation deck began to crackle with a different kind of energy, a familiar, chilling distortion. The sleek, silver forms of the Time Integrity Core cruisers phased into existence around the perimeter of the hall, hovering in silent judgment. The lead officer's dispassionate voice echoed, devoid of any acknowledgement of their salvation. The paradox has been resolved. The unauthorized intervention, however, remains. You are still fugitives from temporal law. Prepare for erasure. The celebration died in their throats. They had saved reality, only to be condemned by its police for the crime of having acted. The silver-clad commander of the Time Integrity Corps stood before them, his form solidifying from a shimmer of displaced air. He removed his mirrored helmet, revealing a face that was not cruel, but held the weary, absolute authority of a judge who had presided over the end of worlds. You have successfully prevented a Class 1 temporal catastrophe, he stated, his voice flat and final. The evidence is irrefutable. You have saved this primary continuum. A flicker of hope died in their chests at his next words. However, your methods have created 17 significant paradox branches, each requiring costly stabilization. You operated outside the law. The integrity of time is not built on heroes but on order. His gaze swept over them, impersonal and final. Therefore, the price of your victory is this. Your memories of these events, from the moment you received the first warning, must be erased. You will be returned to your native timeline with no recollection of your journey, your actions, or each other. The judgment was not a punishment. It was a balancing of the cosmic books. They had saved the universe, but the universe demanded payment in the currency of their own experience. The victory they had fought for, the horrors they had witnessed, the bonds they had forged in the ashes of tomorrow, all of it would be taken from them, leaving their minds as blank as the moment before it all began. They would go home to a world they had saved, forever unaware of the terrible cost they had personally paid to make it so. Thorne stepped forward, his body aching with a fatigue that went deeper than bone. "We accept the memory wipe," he said, his voice quiet but unyielding. "But on one condition, let a fragment of the warning remain, not as a visible message, but as a silent sentinel, buried deep within the network's core code where no one will ever see it. A single line, a testament to the cost of arrogance, so that no one ever makes the same mistake again. It would be a ghost in the machine, not of fear, but of remembrance." The Time Integrity Corps commander studied him, his expression unreadable. The silence stretched, filled only by the gentle, healthy hum of the stabilized network. Finally, the commander gave a single, slow nod. A prudent compromise, he conceded, his voice losing its edge of absolute judgment. "It shall be done." One of his officers moved to a terminal, his fingers dancing across the interface. Into the very heart of the code that now connected a civilization, he wove a single encrypted line, a ghost of a ghost. It was not the desperate plea from the future, but its echo, a quiet scar on the foundation of reality that would whisper of a path not taken, a lesson paid for in a currency of forgotten memories. The work was finished. The commander turned back to them, a device humming softly in his hand. "The process is painless," he stated. "You will simply wake up in your own time in your own lab and continue your work. You will have a strange, lingering feeling, perhaps, a sense of déjà vu when you look at the stars, but nothing more." One by one, the soft light of the device washed over them. For Ilara, it was the fading warmth of a campfire in a dead world. For Kale, it was the weight of a rifle he would never again hold. For Aris Thorne, it was the final, determined gaze of his ancestor, Isabel, a face he would never remember. The light brightened, and then there was nothing. The light did not burn. It washed over them like a gentle, rising tide, warm and forgiving. Aris Thorne felt the sharp edges of his memories begin to soften and blur, the terrifying details of ash and ruin dissolving into a formless, golden glow. He turned his head, and through the luminous haze he saw Ilara and Cale looking back at him. No words passed between them. None were needed. In that final, shared glance was an entire history. The taste of fear, the weight of a dead world, the fierce joy of a battle won. They had already forgotten the how and the why, but the feeling, the profound and unshakable certainty of a job done, of a catastrophe averted, remained as their last conscious thought. It was a monument built not of stone, but of pure emotion, standing for a single, perfect moment before the tide swept it all away. The world dissolved into a featureless white, and the hum of the network, the murmur of the crowd, the very sound of his own heartbeat faded into an immense and silent peace. Then, from the very edge of that silence, a whisper threaded its way into the void. It was faint and distorted, a ghost on a dead line. "The Cascade is coming for a splinter of a second." The warning echoed in the emptiness, a final, fleeting scar on his soul. And then, it too vanished into the quiet, leaving nothing behind but the stars waiting. The sterile air of the lab hummed with a familiar, almost comforting energy. Dr. Aris Thorne stood before the dormant Chronos Gate, its surface a placid, dark mirror. He blinked, a sudden and profound wave of déjà vu washing over him. It was a hollow feeling, an echo of something immense and terrible that had left no mark, like the ghost of a forgotten dream. A vague, formless unease settled in his chest, a conviction that something was deeply, fundamentally important, yet just beyond the reach of his memory. His colleague, Dr. Evans, clapped him on the shoulder. Ready for the first test, Aris? Thorne did not immediately reply. His eyes remained fixed on the gate, his mind grappling with an inexplicable urge for caution, a deep-seated knowledge that felt both alien and intrinsically his own. After a long, silent moment, he turned, his voice quiet but firm. "Yes, but let us run one more diagnostic on the resonance dampeners." He met his colleague's slightly puzzled look with a steady gaze, the words feeling more like a remembered ritual than a new suggestion. "We just cannot be too careful." It was an unspoken tribute to a lesson he had never formally learned, a silent nod to a catastrophe that now existed only as a phantom limb on the timeline, its absence the only proof it had ever been there at all. The years flowed smoothly, marked by the gentle hum of a network that had woven itself into the fabric of daily life. Starships slipped between solar systems, and communication across light years was as simple as a whisper. It was a golden age, seamless and quiet, the memory of its brush with annihilation buried so deep it was forgotten even by the ghosts. Then, on a Tuesday like any other, a minor, unexplained energy fluctuation rippled through a tertiary relay station in the Proxima Centauri system. It was a tiny anomaly, a blip so small it should have been logged and forgotten. But deep within the network's core, in a layer of code no engineer had ever written or seen, a silent sentinel stirred. The hidden fragment, the ghost of the warning, recognized the fluctuation's unique harmonic signature. It was the same resonance that had once presaged the Cascade. Without fanfare, the fragment activated its one and only function. Across the globe, in control centers from Geneva to Tokyo to the Martian colonies, every primary engineering console chimed simultaneously with a single, prioritized alert. Senior engineer Lena Petrova frowned at her screen, the message displayed in a stark, unfamiliar font she had never seen in any system manual. It read, "Review Protocol Theta. Prioritize system stability." Protocol Theta was not a standard procedure. It was an obscure, almost mythical reference mentioned in the oldest foundational archives, a set of contingency plans so thorough they were considered academic relics. There was no directive, no explanation, only this strange, automated command. Puzzled, but trusting the system's inexplicable urgency, Lena and her global colleagues initiated the protocol. What they found was not a simple glitch. Protocol Theta led them through a labyrinth of subsystems to a tiny, cascading feedback loop beginning to form in the network's quantum routing matrix. Left unchecked, it would have amplified, creating a domino effect of system-wide failures that mirrored, on a smaller scale, the very unraveling that had been prevented decades before. They applied the prescribed dampeners, and the fluctuation smoothed into nothing. The potential disaster was averted before it could even begin, stopped by a guardian no one knew was watching. The engineers closed the incident report, marking it as a successful if mysterious system self-correction. They had no memory of the cost that had purchased this safety net, no knowledge of the forgotten sacrifice that had just echoed across time to save them all once more. The Sentinel had done its job, and then it returned to its silent vigil, a quiet scar on reality protecting the future from the ghosts of its past. The memory of Ash was a ghost in his lungs, a sensation Cale could never quite name. In this new world, his past as a scavenger was a forgotten dream, replaced by the crisp reality of a consultant's badge and the quiet hum of a thriving global network. He was hired for his sharp eye and his reputation for ruthless pragmatism, a man who saw failure points where others saw only elegant design. His current assignment was the most prestigious of his career, a full system audit of the Chronos Gate network's core code. He sat in a silent, climate-controlled server farm, surrounded by the gentle blue glow of processing units, tracing lines of logic that were the bedrock of modern civilization. Most of the code was a masterpiece of flawless engineering, but his attention kept snagging on a single, isolated subroutine. It was a tiny thing, a fragment of encryption wrapped in layers of dormant protocols. According to the official documentation, it was a legacy artifact, a piece of deprecated code from the original prototypes that served no active function. The system logs showed it had never been accessed, never triggered, never done anything at all. Yet, every time his gaze passed over its string of symbols, a cold, inexplicable certainty settled in his chest. He felt a pull, a deep, wordless imperative that this specific piece of code was profoundly, critically important. He ran every diagnostic in his arsenal. He cross-referenced it with every known protocol. He found nothing. There was no rational, data-driven reason for his fixation. It was a pure gut feeling, an instinct carved from a life he could not remember. In his final report, amidst hundreds of technical recommendations, he included a single, seemingly minor line. He advised that the legacy subroutine, while functionally inert, should not be deprecated or removed. Instead, he recommended its isolation be reinforced with additional, redundant security layers. He framed it as a matter of principle, of leaving no potential vector, however insignificant, unchecked. The network architects, respecting his renowned thoroughness, complied without question. They walled off the ghost in the machine with unbreakable encryption, ensuring it would remain untouched and operational for centuries to come. Cale signed off on the audit, the strange pull in his gut finally quieted. He had no idea he had just safeguarded the very Sentinel that had, in a timeline now erased, once saved him. The equations were wrong. For Ilara Vance, now the celebrated director of the Temporal Physics Institute, the realization arrived not with a bang, but with the quiet persistence of a decimal point out of place. Her latest models, designed to map the stability of local spacetime, kept generating faint, phantom readings. They were echoes, impossibly faint ripples in the fabric of reality that corresponded to no known energy source or event in recorded history. At first, she dismissed them as systemic noise, an artifact of her own increasingly sensitive equipment. But the echoes persisted, a ghostly signature woven into the background of the universe itself. They were not random. They held a pattern, a terrible, familiar coherence that stirred a deep, formless dread in the pit of her stomach. It was the same harmonic resonance her damaged scanner had once registered in a future that was now, according to all official records, a scientific impossibility. She was not detecting energy. She was reading a scar. Her subsequent paper, Residual Chronal Impressions, sent shockwaves through the global scientific community. In it, she proposed a radical new theory that the universe itself possesses a kind of memory. Major temporal events, she argued, especially those of catastrophic potential, leave a permanent imprint on the quantum foam of spacetime, even if the catastrophe is ultimately averted. The echoes were not a malfunction. They were the universe remembering a path it almost took, a lesson etched into reality itself. The implications were staggering. It was not just physics. It was a philosophy, a mandate for a new kind of scientific humility. Her work provided the first mathematical proof that some warnings are so profound they can echo backwards through time, not as messages, but as permanent features of the cosmos. The paper did more than win awards. It fundamentally changed the conversation around technological progress, embedding a core principle of caution into every major development that followed. The ghost in the machine had, at last, found its voice in the language of science. That strange, lingering impulse for caution did not fade with time. It crystallized. What began as Dr. Thorne's inexplicable urge for one more diagnostic in a single lab evolved into a new cultural doctrine, spreading from Earth across the burgeoning star systems. They called it the Thorne Protocol, a series of brutal, extreme stress tests required for any major technological deployment. It was no longer enough for a system to work. It had to be tested to the point of deliberate, controlled failure to prove it could fail safely. Engineers did not just ask if their creation could achieve its goal. They were now required to ask a far more profound question. What is the absolute worst-case scenario, and how do we build a cage for it? This was not a rejection of progress, but its responsible stewardship. The ignored warning from the future, a ghost that no one remembered, had become the unshakable foundation of galactic law. Its legacy was not a monument, but a methodology, a permanent whisper of humility in the ear of ambition. How many other potential disasters were quietly averted by this simple, systemic insistence on looking twice? We will never know, and that is the entire point. Anya Sharma never touched the activation panel again. The applause that should have been her triumph curdled into a quiet, personal revolution. She withdrew from OmniCorp, leaving the glittering ceremony and its promises behind. Her life's work was not a monument but a minefield, and she had been its most passionate architect. This sobering truth became her new foundation. With the quiet fortune she had accumulated, she established the Sharma Foundation, an organization with a deceptively simple mission: to find the hidden fractures in our technological ambitions before they can spread. She became a ghost at the feast of progress, a necessary voice of caution in a world drunk on possibility. Her most famous speech, delivered to a new generation of engineers, was built around a single, transformative idea. The greatest innovation is not the technology itself, but the foresight to ensure it does not destroy us. She did not speak of equations, but of stories. She would paint a vivid picture of a self-driving car system, one that optimized traffic flow with breathtaking efficiency. Then she would ask her audience to consider the hidden risk, not a bug in the code, but a centralized control system that a malicious actor could hold hostage, holding entire cities for ransom. Her foundation did not just theorize, it acted. They famously partnered with the developers of a revolutionary medical nanite, tiny machines designed to repair cellular damage. The initial tests were flawless, a miracle of modern medicine, but the Sharma Foundation team, applying their rigorous protocol, ran a simulation on the nanite's replication safeguards. They discovered that in a specific, rare cellular environment, the machines could misinterpret healthy tissue as a resource for unlimited self-replication. The cure could become a cancer. Because of their intervention, the design was altered. A simple governor installed that prevented the catastrophe before it could ever leave the laboratory. Anya Sharma's legacy was not a single machine or a line of code. It was a cultural immune system, a built-in reflex to ask the difficult second question, to look for the ghost in the machine, not with fear, but with profound responsibility. She ensured that the echo of a forgotten warning became the bedrock of a safer, more conscious future. The timeline healed with a quiet perfection that was, to the time integrity core, the only reward that mattered. From their citadel outside the flow of seconds, they watched the new branch of reality flourish. Starships charted courses that were once impossible, and 1,000 worlds bloomed in peaceful collaboration, all of it made possible by a sacrifice they would never recall. The commander who had presided over the erasure stood before a vast chronal map, the vibrant, stable line of the primary continuum glowing a steady, reassuring blue. He watched the data streams of this golden age, a symphony of progress playing out exactly as it should. They sacrificed their memory to save countless realities, he observed to a junior officer, his voice devoid of pride, filled only with a solemn finality. Their legacy is a universe that will never know how close it came to the brink. It was not a monument anyone would visit. It was the simple, profound peace of a morning that dawned without catastrophe, a peace purchased with currency no one remembered spending. The core turned its attention to other nascent fractures in the multiverse, their silent vigil continuing. They were the gardeners of reality, pruning paradoxes so that other stories, other lives, could simply live, blissfully unaware of the silent, thankless work that made their existence possible. The network's core was a symphony of silent light, a sprawling digital city humming with the business of an entire civilization. Lena, a junior systems programmer, was assigned the tedious but necessary task of cleaning up legacy code, removing digital dust from the deepest archives. She was tracing a minor routing error when she found it, nestled within a module so old its documentation was written in a deprecated programming language. It was a single line marked as a comment, a string of seemingly random characters, Theta 7, Niner Whiskey. It was not a command, it was not a variable, it was a ghost, a string of numbers and letters that served no logical purpose in the system's architecture. Her finger hovered over the delete key. It was clutter, it was inefficiency. Removing it was her job. Yet, as her cursor highlighted the cryptic text, a cold, inexplicable dread coiled in her stomach. It was a feeling entirely her own, a deep, instinctual warning that had no place in the sterile logic of her work. This was not a bug. It felt like a tombstone. She could not explain why, but deleting it felt like a profound act of vandalism, like chipping a single, vital stone from a foundation she could not see. With a quiet sigh, she de-highlighted the code. She added a new comment of her own on the line below, "Legacy artifact, do not remove." She then saved the file and moved on, the strange feeling of foreboding slowly fading, replaced by the mundane focus of her next task. She had no idea she had just obeyed an echo from a forgotten war, that her simple, inexplicable act of preservation was a silent tribute to a sacrifice that had saved her world. The whisper in the code remained, a quiet sentinel in the machine, its purpose still fulfilled. Decades later, a historian named Dr. Ilara Petrosian sifted through the digital ashes of the early network era. She was not looking for grand triumphs, but for the small, strange inconsistencies that official histories tend to overlook. In a collection of declassified Omni-Corp maintenance logs, she found a curious anomaly. The logs detailed a minor power fluctuation in a remote mountain facility on the very day of the network's first successful test. The official report listed it as a glitch in a tertiary cooling system. But the energy signature, a faint harmonic resonance logged by an automated sensor, was identical to one recorded decades later during a major, but ultimately harmless, system-wide stabilization event. The two events were separated by a generation, yet they were quantum echoes of one another. It was as if the same ghost had whispered into the machine at both its birth and its maturity. Dr. Petrosian's subsequent book, The Silent Architect, ignited a firestorm of debate. She posited that the network's legendary stability was not a happy accident of brilliant engineering. She argued it was the result of a subtle, unrecorded intervention, a guiding hand that had left its fingerprints only in these tiny, paradoxical energy signatures. She called it the ghost in the machine theory. The scientific establishment largely dismissed her work as historical fantasy, a compelling narrative built on coincidental data. How could something influence an event without leaving a physical trace in the records? They demanded a mechanism, a motive, a name. She had none to give. Yet, her theory persisted in the public imagination, a tantalizing mystery that suggested our golden age was not entirely our own doing. It proposed a debt owed to a forgotten savior, a silent partner in our progress whose only monument was the quiet, reliable hum of the world we now took for granted. The stars were a familiar tapestry to the old man. Aris Thorne sat in the quiet of his garden, a soft blanket over his knees, his face tilted toward the night sky. It was not the silent, cold void of his youth. Now it was alive with a delicate, interconnected web of moving lights, the gentle pulse of starships tracing routes between worlds, all made possible by the network he had helped to build. Each steady, predictable light was a balm to his soul, washing over him with a profound and unshakable peace. His young granddaughter, curled in the chair beside him, noticed the quiet smile that always graced his face during these evening vigils. She had heard the stories at school, the whispers of what could have gone wrong in the early days, the fears that still lingered in some corners. "Grandfather," she asked, her voice small in the vastness of the night, "how can you be so sure? How can you just know it is all safe?" Aris turned his gentle gaze from the heavens to her, his eyes crinkling at the corners. He reached over and patted her hand. "I cannot explain it with equations or data, my dear," he said, his voice a soft rumble. "It is a feeling, a certainty that is settled deep in my bones. It is like knowing the sun will rise or that the ground is solid beneath your feet. I just know." He had no memory to attach to the feeling, no grand story of heroism to tell. It was a quiet, foundational truth within him, a legacy of a battle fought and one in a history that no longer existed. Its victory the only thing that remained. The star charts in Ilara Petrosian's observatory were not of space, but of time, mapping the subtle echoes her research had made famous. Across the room, her AI assistant, a silent orb of cool light known as a Chronos archivist, hummed as it processed a new data stream. A proposed schematic for a trans-dimensional bridge flickered above the main console, a breathtaking design meant to fold the space between galaxies. It was the most ambitious project conceived since the Golden Age began. The archivist, cross-referencing trillions of data, points against the entire historical record, did not celebrate. Its light shifted from blue to a soft, insistent amber. An alert materialized in the air between Ilara and the beautiful, dangerous blueprint. The message was stark, its language chillingly specific. Pattern match detected. High correlation to pre-Cascade event parameters. Recommend immediate review of Thorne Protocol. The words hung there, a ghost from a forgotten catastrophe speaking through the machine. Ilara's blood ran cold. She was not a woman prone to panic, but the Thorne Protocol was not a suggestion. It was galactic law, a set of brutal tests born from a mystery no one could fully explain. To ignore its recommendation was unthinkable. She immediately halted all forward momentum on the bridge project, her authorization codes freezing the entire development branch. She then assembled her team not with alarm but with a grim sense of duty. "We have been given a gift," she told them, her voice steady. "A warning from our own history, from the very safeguards put in place to protect us from ourselves." The trans-dimensional bridge was not a flawed idea. It was a magnificent one. But like all powerful tools, it contained a hidden fracture, a potential for resonance that mirrored the conditions of a disaster that once nearly erased reality. The Thorne Protocol demanded they find that fracture, not to destroy the dream, but to build it properly. They began the painstaking work, running the bridge designs through simulations of catastrophic failure. They searched for the single point of stress that could turn a marvel into a weapon, a silent tribute to an echo that refused to be silenced. The bridge was not abandoned but reborn. Ilara's team spent the next 2 years in a state of controlled, meticulous paranoia, driven by the ghost in their data. They did not just add safety features, they re-envisioned the entire design philosophy. The final trans-dimensional bridge was a masterpiece of failsafes, its core architecture built around a principle they called graceful degradation. A single point of failure was no longer possible. If any component even approached a critical threshold, the system would not fight to maintain function. It would instead initiate a controlled, cascading shutdown, sacrificing its own capabilities to preserve the integrity of spacetime around it. The bridge would rather turn itself into a useless, inert sculpture than risk becoming a weapon. This was the ultimate legacy of the ignored warning, a lesson so deeply embedded in their culture that it had reshaped their very definition of success. The project was no longer about reaching the next galaxy at any cost. It was about ensuring there would always be a home to return to, This new, cautious approach became the standard for all major technological leaps, a permanent cycle of vigilance passed down through the generations. The story of the Phantom warning from the future was now taught in schools, not as a verified historical event, but as a powerful parable. Children learned about the scientists who ignored a desperate cry for help and the world they almost lost. They debated the ethics of progress and the heavy responsibility that comes with great power. The specific names and dates were forgotten, but the moral of the story became a cornerstone of their civilization. The message from a future that was erased had achieved a form of immortality. It no longer existed as a data packet in a machine, but as a living idea in the mind of every engineer, every policymaker, and every child who looked at the stars with both wonder and humility. The Sentinel was no longer a line of code. It was a culture, a shared memory of a disaster that never happened, forever protecting the timeline from the ghosts of its own potential. The strange quiet of the void market was broken only by the whisper of data streams flowing between realities. The information broker, his form momentarily resolving into that of the wizened old man, paused as a new packet materialized in his private buffer. It was not addressed from any known timeline or registered vessel. Its point of origin was a temporal coordinate that was, by all laws of causality, a void, a null point in the continuum. He accessed the file, and the entire epic unfolded before his mind's eye: the first warning, the ash-choked future, the desperate chase through time, the confrontation with the Founders, the memory wipe, and the quiet, stable peace that followed. It was a perfect record of a story that no one remembered, a song sung by a chorus that had been silenced. A slow, knowing smile touched his lips. This was not a message for him. It was a message for the universe, a receipt for a debt paid in full. He transferred the data to a crystalline storage device, one that existed partially outside of time itself. With a thought, he etched a single, elegant title onto its surface, a label for a story that was both a warning and a promise. He called it the Price of Prudence, and he placed it in his most secure vault, a library of lost histories and impossible truths. It would wait there, patient and silent, until the day another civilization stood on a similar precipice, blinded by its own brilliance and in need of a ghost's advice. Centuries of flawless operation have woven the network into the silent, trusted rhythm of civilization itself. It is the invisible heartbeat of a galaxy now teeming with life, its foundational code so elegant and stable that engineers speak of it with a kind of reverence. This is no longer a piece of technology, but a living testament to a principle, a monument not carved from stone but from the collective, unseen effort of those who refuse to let the future fail. The hidden Sentinel, that single line of encrypted code, rests within this masterpiece like a single, perfectly placed keystone in an immense arch. It does nothing, and yet it does everything, its mere presence a permanent anchor for the lessons of a catastrophe that never was. The network's greatest achievement is not its speed or its reach, but its profound, unbreakable stability. It is a system that learned from a mistake it never made, guided by a ghost it never knew. How do you measure the value of a warning that was heeded? You measure it in the quiet peace of 1,000 years without a single, system-wide collapse. You see it in the way every new invention is now subjected to the Thorne Protocol, a brutal gauntlet of stress tests that seek out failure not as a possibility, but as an inevitability to be planned for. This is the unbreakable chain, a legacy of vigilance passed down through generations. It is the story of a scar that healed so perfectly it made the entire body stronger, a silent promise to the future, paid for by the forgotten sacrifices of the past. A child's small fingers traced the smooth surface of a public terminal on a colony world orbiting a distant star. This was her daily routine, accessing the educational archives for a history project on early network communications. She selected a file labeled First Test Transmission, Raw Data, expecting the dry, technical hum that all the other recordings held. The sound that filled her ears was a chaotic hiss of static, the birth cry of a technology that now ruled her world. But then, for a single, impossible second, the static seemed to part. It was not a word, not really. It was a ghost of a syllable, a faint, pleading distortion that sounded almost like a human voice whispering a fragment of a desperate thought. It might have been listen. She tilted her head, her young brow furrowed in concentration, and played the segment again. The sound was gone, lost once more in the primordial noise of the data stream. She shrugged, a small, dismissive gesture, and closed the file, marking her assignment as complete. To her, it was just a glitch, an anomaly in an old recording. She had no idea that the echo of a warning sent across the ruins of time had at last reached a pair of living ears. The message had been delivered, not to a scientist or a leader, but to a child in a future that was now safe, its meaning softened into a mystery. The plea had finally been heard. Its urgency faded into a curiosity for a school project, which was perhaps the most peaceful resolution a desperate cry could ever hope to find. Progress is not a mountain we conquer, but a garden we must tend with endless care. The story of the ignored warning resolves not with a final, thunderous clash, but with the quiet hum of a system that remembers its own brush with extinction. The true victory was not in a single act of heroism, but in the cultural shift that followed, a permanent layer of caution woven into the fabric of ambition. The ghosts of the catastrophe, those who sacrificed their memories, achieved a deeper form of immortality. They became the Thorne Protocol, the Sharma Foundation, the unspoken rule to look twice. Their legacy is a universe that no longer fears the message from the future, because its lesson has been internalized, a quiet voice of reason that speaks in the language of safety checks and worst-case scenarios. The hard-won hope we are left with is not a naive optimism, but a sober understanding that our greatest achievements are protected not by their brilliance, but by our willingness to find their hidden fractures. This is the profound cost of ignorance transformed into the enduring power of vigilance, and deep within the network's core, in a log file no one will ever see, a system that learned from a mistake it never made generates its final, peaceful report. The message is simple, a testament to a battle won in silence, all systems nominal, chronological stability